Well, the entire Fraser is an amazing waterway. I've had the opportunity to paddle it from its source to its mouth, going back to the mid-70s. And it is an amazing river. It's the heart and soul of our province. In terms of the gravel reach, though, looking at that Hope to Mission stretch, that is literally the heart of the Fraser. It's an amazing stretch of waterway. It's, I think, one of the most productive stretches of river anywhere in the world.
Everything is connected through the river. Like the river is a main part of us because we call ourselves Stalo. And Stalo in our language means river. We call the river the Stalo as well. So there's a connection that we have, a relationship that we have with the river, meaning that we're the people of the river.
Between 10 and 5,000 years ago, you've got absolutely incredible changes happening around here in terms of huge, entire shifts and replacements of vegetation populations. Massive changes in the waterways and incredible amounts of water, unlike anything we would have seen before from glacial runoff and meltwater coming through this region. Fluctuations in temperature, huge environmental fluctuations. That everything ultimately stabilizes, even sea levels changing around that time from 10,000 to 5,000 years ago. So that by 5,000 years ago, you could describe this as a period of stabilization. And in that period, you have the emergence of the first permanent houses and villages. Again, some of the oldest of which are in this part of the Central Fraser Valley.
We consider ourselves to be here for a long time. We've had a very close relationship with the river because the river, at one time it is part of our Chilliwack stories. Like we have an oral history that talks about when Chichelsa transformers came through here, transforming ancestors into mountains or stone or into resources. Well, the river plays a big part of that as well because the river was actually a transformation by the transformers or by Chichelsa.
There's a huge amount of species that come through this area. Your yellow rumps, your yellow warblers, Townsend's warbler, black-throated gray, all your vireos. Then in the summer, you have the ones that come, the neotropicals that come and they stay. Like you have your black-headed grosbeaks in big numbers, the western tanager, beautiful red, black and yellow bird, really a tropical looking bird. You have hummingbirds, lots of swallows, and this is the Fraser and this area are hugely important for swallows. And I don't know if you realize, but the barn swallow, which wouldn't nest here but would feed in this area, is now a listed species because it's been hit really hard.
The company, Scott Paper, originally started the tree farm license areas back in the late 50s, early 60s. The company has a small pulp mill in New Westminster where we make pulp for tissue products. And one of the species that works very good, and the only tree that we use in that mill, is cottonwoods. So these areas were purchased by the company during those periods because there was some native cottonwood on this area, but also it was very productive land for reforesting to cottonwood trees.
Six or 700 years ago, you begin to see a grouping of villages develop around the mouths of rivers, at these hub locations, and in this area, Central Fraser Valley, you'd be talking for one, the mouth of the Harrison, where Harrison and Fraser River connect, and you see the development of, for the first time in Stalo history, at that time, the occupation of villages right in the river, at these hub locations that are central, highly important villages. You couldn't get as central to the communication system as being in the river itself, as being more Stalo than that. And that seems to be the case, where about 600 or 700 years ago, these systems develop, these island communities emerge, and place themselves as central villages, central points for communicating and trading, for commerce, economic and political activities, right in the heart of the Fraser at these different places up and down the river, from Central Fraser Valley, Hope area, and up into the canyon.
The state of the river, certainly it does face some pressures. It's been on the annual Outdoor Recreation Council Endangered Rivers list for 17 out of the last 18 years. So it does face an array of pressures. That said, many of those take place on the bottom end of the river, and that's not to take away from the fact, though, that the heart of the Fraser, that Hope to Mission stretch, still has incredible values. But if we are to protect those, I think we have to take action sooner rather than later, because I think we only have a window of a few years, of several years really, before those pressures associated with urban development and industrial development and agricultural expansion, before those kinds of things nibble away at the great values found there. So my hope is that we will act soon enough and protect those great values while we still can.
These islands are along floodplains. The Fraser Valley is a floodplain. If it wasn't controlled by the dikes on both sides, the river would still flood right to the margins, right to the sides. That provides extremely fertile growing site. You have good quality, well-drained soils generally that are flat and level, and that you can cultivate. So that makes them very productive.
Our native species are becoming increasingly endangered. Probably in the Chilliwack district, we have 50 species that, whether salamanders or plants or whatever, that were once relatively common and now are listed species. I know way back I looked at the Brooks, who was here before the draining of Sumas Lake. I looked at his records from 1917 he published, and he put down whether a species was common or tolerably common or rare or what its status was. And I compared that, and I found basically 100 species in the Chilliwack area alone that were once common and now would be considered rare or endangered.
Well, the biggest thing that impacted us was prior to Simon Fraser was actually the smallpox epidemic, which arrived here in 1782. It had a huge devastation on our people. Before any of the Europeans arrived, that disease came in and wiped out at least 60 to 90% of our population. So you can only imagine, the huge negative impact that would have on our people. Of course, in 1808, that's when Simon Fraser came down. He came down the river, went as far as Musqueam, then he's chased back by the Musqueam, chased back up river. So he didn't spend a lot of time here. There's an oral history that talks about how some of our people, like people around Scowlitz, thought that he was actually Chachels returning. In fact, people up in Yale brought him to a place called Thachlis. Thachlis is the scratch marks where Chachels, the transformer, had a battle with Chael Chelamis. Chachels was left his thumbnail scratch marks in the rock there, and so the people up in that area brought Simon Fraser there and told him that people like him were here before. And so it seemed pretty clear that they thought because Chachels had disappeared off into the sunrise and Simon Fraser was coming from the sunrise coming downriver, people tended to think that he had something to do with Chachels, or it was kind of like the return of Chachels. But it didn't take long for them to realize it wasn't Chachels. In fact, the Musqueam people ended up chasing him back upriver, and of course he went back upriver, never to be seen again.
Where we are now in this system is a critical junction or juncture between rivers. We're in the central Fraser Valley, in a central part of the Stalo system. And again, what looks like a fairly calm, peaceful setting is a busy crossroads in history between the Harrison system to the north, the Chilliwack system to the south, and similar to the highway system that exists now, we would be at a point where there are two major exits off this freeway. So boat traffic, heavy boat traffic, all up and down the river at this point, with the options to turn off and head north and visit the many villages that existed along the Harrison system, up the Harrison Lake, and a freeway to the interior. Likewise, an opportunity to turn south and head up the Chilliwack River system and visit the Chilliwack folks along to the south of here, and that leads to the Chilliwack Valley and to the systems and settlements and folks that connect southwards down into the Skagit.
The one thing that's happening is like you have all the development right next door here to the east, and so that creates a break in the continuation of the habitat. So you have your hundreds of thousands, millions of birds migrating up the Fraser. All of a sudden they come to development. There's no more feeding, but they also are then, it's an open site, very little protection from predators, so you can have the peregrine falcons hunting this area. You can have glass windows and lights and things that disorient them on their normal paths, that they're going to have to leave here and fly to the next in the open, and so they become more vulnerable, and they're using energy instead of slowly hopping along from tree to tree, building energy in that, and then there's always the pollutions and the little water puddles that look so good to go bathe in. You don't know what's going to be in them. A lot of times they're fine, but a lot of times something is not fine with these things. You get the gulls, and of course anytime where you have a lot of fish in a great river like the Fraser, you have a lot of gulls and water birds that can get caught in fishing lines and things like that, and there's a lot of dumping along here which needs to be patrolled all the time. It needs someone on it full time to be watching for things like that, and a continuation of habitat is a really crucial thing. So the more you can keep everything in one place and back from the Fraser, unless it's absolutely necessary to be on the Fraser, I think they shouldn't be allowed to be. There should be that large riparian zone that wildlife can move through and keep the continuation of the habitat. Also, any shading or anything like that is very important for fish. That's one of the reasons that they keep citing for our low returns, is that when the salmon have to go up the river and it's too warm, they refuse to go up, or they just deteriorate and waiting for a better time to move up the river when the waters are cooler and higher.
Well, the heart of the Fraser, the great thing about it is that up until now it's been very much of a grassroots initiative, which I think is important. You really have a lot of grassroots push, and I think that'll be key to doing the right thing. But my hope is, because of that the federal government, the provincial government, and all local governments will come on board as well. And I think all of those layers of government do see the Fraser as being exceptionally important to our province, very, very important to the future of our province. So my hope is that because of that, you'll get this great support at the grassroots level, but that ultimately you'll also find support amongst all levels of government. And my hope is in the next few years that's where we'll get to.
What we need is like every other species on the planet, we need fresh air, clean water, and good food, good healthy food. And places like this and in the mountains and hills and in the area, they all help to keep the water clean, to take the pollutants out of the air, and the dust and things and that come off of the clean environment, they actually build the soil, the flooding and things like that in a natural way.
I think our vision for the future would be, to clean up the river, restore some of the habitat. I know one of the problems that we had in the past as well was the destruction of habitat being taken away. Like for instance, at the upper end of Seabird Island, there used to be a bridge there when the CPR was constructed. In the 1894 flood, it washed out that bridge, and then instead of rebuilding the bridge, they filled it in with riprap and blocked the course of the river, so the river couldn't make its way around the island. So Seabird Island isn't an island anymore, and the elders tell us that the importance of that side channel was for the sturgeon. And of course, there's coho as well that spawn in that channel. So that channel has been taken away, and of course other places as well. You look at the diking system, how the diking system came into being, and although the diking protects homes and that from flooding, I'm sure that interferes with the habitat as well. And when you look at the fact that there are two railroads as well, the Canadian Pacific Railroad that went through in 1885 and the Canadian National Railroad in 1913, the huge impacts that they had, on the habitat and in the migration routes of the salmon. And then of course the draining of Sumas Lake as well. This took a lot of the habitat away. So I think that those are probably the two main areas, that our vision would be, is to clean up the pollution in the river that allows the salmon numbers to come back up, the ulican numbers to come back up. Any concerns that we have over the sturgeon and other runs of fish would if those numbers could come up as well, and then the restoration of the habitat as well, looking at ways of perhaps it might be a good idea to open up that side channel that goes around Seabird Island and other things such as that.
I think what I've come to learn by working in this region for well over a decade now is to see the invisible and recognize that as an extension of people. To look at the mountains, to look at the river, and not just to see a natural geographic fluvial landscape, but to see people in those landscapes.